Ordinary day turns into chaos. David Carter wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he stacked the last box of canned goods onto the shelf of Miller's corner store. The old fluorescent lights above flickered softly, buzzing with a faint hum that had become part of the background noise of his life. It was nearly 6:30 in the evening, and outside the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden rays through the dusty front windows of the small neighborhood shop. The street outside was quiet, the kind of ordinary Tuesday night that felt safe and uneventful, the kind of night when nothing extraordinary should happen. David hoped it would stay that way because ordinary meant he could finish his shift, pick up his son, and head home to a simple dinner. That was enough for him. Ordinary was all he wanted these days. On the counter near the cash register, his 8-year-old son Ethan sat with his notebook spread out, a pencil in his hand, and a determined look on his young face. His legs swung back and forth beneath the stool, not quite reaching the ground as he worked on his math homework. Ethan had his father's dark brown hair and gentle eyes, the kind of eyes that always seemed to hold questions about the world. Life had not been easy on him. Losing his mother 2 years ago had left an ache in his little heart that David tried every day to soothe. But no matter how many bedtime stories he read or how many hugs he gave, nothing could ever fully replace the soft presence of his late wife. Still, Ethan was a resilient boy. He smiled often, laughed at little jokes, and carried a bravery in his small chest that reminded David of his wife's spirit. As David watched him quietly scribble numbers and erase mistakes with fierce concentration, pride swelled in his chest. This boy was his whole world. Everything he did, every long shift, every sacrifice was for Ethan's foot. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet of the store, "can we get ice cream on the way home tonight? Please? I've been really good with my homework this week." His eyes lifted from the page, wide and hopeful, sparkling with the kind of innocence that melted David's heart every time. David smiled softly, leaning against the shelf for a moment. Money had been tight since Sarah's passing. The medical bills had drained what little savings they had, and raising a child on his own with just the salary of a store clerk had been more than a challenge. Still, he never wanted Ethan to feel the weight of their struggles. He wanted him to feel loved, secure, and cared for, even if it meant cutting corners quietly in his own life. "Sure, champ," David said warmly, walking over and ruffling his son's hair. "Ice cream it is. You've been working hard, and hard work deserves a little reward." Ethan grinned, his face lighting up in a way that made David's tired body suddenly feel lighter. The bell above the front door chimed, and both of them turned toward the entrance. A woman in a sleek, dark business suit walked in briskly, a phone pressed firmly to her ear. Her hair was neatly pinned, her heels clicked against the old tile floor, and her voice carried with a tone of authority that filled the small shop. She was talking about numbers, about deadlines, about something involving stock prices and investors. David recognized the sound of corporate language, though he never lived in that world. Trailing just a few steps behind her was a little girl, no more than 6 years old. She had delicate features and wore a simple white dress that seemed out of place next to her mother's polished suit. Her light brown curls framed her face, and she held on to a small stuffed rabbit by one arm. Her steps were slow, tired, and hesitant, as though she had been dragged along to places she didn't want to be. "Mommy, can we go home now?" the little girl asked quietly, her voice almost drowned by the clicking of her mother's heels and the sharp words of the phone conversation. "Not now, Lily," the woman replied quickly, barely glancing down. "Mommy's working, just wait a little longer." Her eyes stayed locked on the phone, her tone clipped and distracted. David watched silently from behind the counter, his chest tightening a little. He had seen people like her before, always busy, always important, too important to notice the small hands tugging at their sleeves. He didn't judge her harshly. Life was complicated, and maybe this woman had her own struggles, just as he did. Still, his heart ached a little for the little girl. As Lily wandered down one of the aisles, she paused by a shelf that displayed a row of small toys, plastic cars, little dolls, and trinkets meant to catch the eyes of children. Her gaze settled on a small pink figurine of a ballerina, her tiny hand reaching out to hold it. For a moment she studied it with quiet longing, her lips curving in the smallest smile. But after a second, she placed it back gently, shaking her head as though reminding herself she wasn't allowed to ask. David stepped out from behind the counter, walking toward her with a kind expression. "That's a nice toy," he said softly. "My son Ethan likes looking at those too." The girl looked up at him with wide blue eyes blinking shyly. "It's pretty," she said quietly, "but Mommy's busy. She doesn't like it when I ask for things while she's working." David's chest tightened again, and for a moment he thought about Ethan and the way he sometimes looked longingly at things in the store, never demanding, always cautious because he knew money was scarce. It wasn't fair that children had to carry the weight of adult problems. They should have been free to smile, to ask, to dream without limit. As behind them, Catherine, the woman in the business suit, paced near the front of the store, her phone pressed tight against her ear. She was nodding, frowning, adjusting her tone in sharp bursts of confidence. She barely noticed her daughter at all. Ethan had stopped working on his homework and was watching quietly from the counter, his small chin resting on his hand. His eyes flicked from Lily to his father, as if trying to understand the sadness written in the air. The evening felt slow, ordinary, and yet something unseen lingered. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps it was fate, but David felt a faint unease stir in his stomach, like the air before a storm. He brushed it away, forcing himself to focus on kindness, on his son, on the little girl clutching her rabbit. Then the bell above the door chimed again. This time the air changed instantly. Two men stepped inside, moving quickly, their faces partially hidden by baseball caps pulled low. Their clothes were dark, their movements sharp, almost rehearsed. David's stomach dropped. He had worked in the store long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. These weren't ordinary customers. The taller man scanned the room with hard eyes, his hand already slipping beneath his jacket. The shorter one moved toward the door, flipping the sign to closed and sliding the lock shut with a loud click that echoed in the silence. David's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He could feel the danger before it fully revealed itself. And then, in one swift motion, the taller man pulled out a gun. "Everyone stay calm and nobody gets hurt," the man barked, his voice sharp and commanding. A cold chill swept through the store. Ethan's eyes went wide with terror as he froze behind the counter. Lily dropped her stuffed rabbit, her little hands trembling as she stood in the middle of the aisle. Catherine finally lowered her phone, her face draining of color as she realized what was happening. "Phones down! Hands where we can see them," the man shouted. "This is just business. Give us what's in the register and we'll be gone." Old Mr. Miller, the owner of the store, stepped forward from behind a side door, his hands shaking violently. "Please, just take the money," he stammered. "No one needs to get hurt." His voice cracked with fear. The shorter robber moved quickly, his eyes darting around as he grabbed for wallets and jewelry. He yanked Catherine's phone and watch from her hands with a sneer. "Nice," he muttered. "This'll cover rent for months." David's entire body was tense. His instincts screamed at him to act, but his son was behind him, terrified, and Lily was still frozen in the open, her small frame trembling like a leaf. The taller robber turned suddenly, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the little girl standing helplessly in the middle of the store. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "Look at that," he said slowly, lifting the gun toward her. "Maybe we should take her with us. Insurance." David's heart nearly stopped. Ethan gasped from behind the counter. Catherine's voice cracked as she cried out, "No, please, she's just a child." Lily whimpered softly, her tiny hands clutching the rabbit she had picked up again, her blue eyes brimming with fear. David felt time slow down. His breath came shallow, his mind raced. His son was behind him, his world, his reason for living. But this little girl, this stranger, was about to be dragged into a nightmare no child should face. Her mother was too far away to protect her. She was alone, defenseless. And in that moment, David understood something deep inside himself. He couldn't let it happen. Not while he was here. Not while he had the strength to stand. His pulse thundered in his ears, and every muscle in his body prepared for what he knew he was about to do. The robber's hand tightened on the gun, his cruel grin widening. David stepped forward, his voice steady though his heart roared. "Leave her alone," he said firmly. The robber's head snapped toward him, the smile vanishing, the gun now trained on David's chest. And in that suspended second, the impossible choice stood before him. Save himself and keep Ethan safe, or risk everything for a little girl he had only just met. David's jaw tightened. His decision was already made. The choice of a father, the moment stretched thin like glass about to shatter. The taller robber's gun pointed straight at Lily, the little girl frozen in fear, her tiny fingers still clutching the rabbit. Her wide eyes darted around the store, searching desperately for her mother, but Catherine stood too far away, powerless, her own face pale with dread. Ethan's soft whimper came from behind the counter, his frightened gaze locked on his father. Every heart in that store pounded against the silence, every breath shallow, every second dragging with unbearable weight. David Carter stood between two worlds. Behind him was his son, his only family left, the child who gave meaning to his life. In front of him was a stranger's daughter, trembling in the open, about to be used as leverage by a man who saw her as nothing more than a shield. His mind screamed to protect Ethan, to stay back, to let this nightmare pass over them. But something stronger rose in his chest, an instinct, a fire that refused to let innocence suffer in front of him. The robber's cruel grin widened, his voice thick with malice. "Pretty little insurance, huh? No one moves, or the kid gets it." Catherine's legs nearly gave out. "Please," she begged, her hands shaking, "please don't touch her. Take me, take the money, anything, just not her." But the man's eyes gleamed with power. He liked the fear, the control. He wanted to see them all break. David's fists clenched. His chest burned with a mixture of fear and determination. He had faced loss before. When Sarah died, his world collapsed. He had promised himself then that Ethan would never face that kind of helplessness again. And now here was another child just as defenseless, about to be scarred forever. In that second, David made the impossible choice. He couldn't let the robber take Lily. He couldn't stand by while a child was dragged into terror. He had been many things in his life: a husband, a father, a worker, a man struggling against hardship, but at his core, he was someone who would rather suffer himself than let others fall. He stepped forward slowly, his voice steady, though his heart pounded like a war drum. "Leave her alone," he said firmly, his eyes locked on the robber. "She's just a little girl. You don't want to do this." The robber whipped his head toward him, the grin vanishing. The gun shifted, now trained directly on David's chest. "Well, well," the man sneered. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero." David didn't flinch. He didn't lower his gaze. He stood tall, even as fear coursed through his veins. "Take me instead," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "You want a hostage? You want leverage? I'm right here. Leave the kids alone." Behind him, Ethan's breath caught. "Dad," his small voice cracked, full of panic. David glanced back for only a moment, meeting his son's terrified eyes. He offered the faintest smile, the kind of smile that said everything without words. "It's going to be okay. Be brave for me." The taller robber's expression twisted. He wasn't used to defiance. He liked victims who cowered, who obeyed without question. But here was a man standing in front of him, not shaking, not begging for his own life, but offering it in place of a child's. It unsettled him. The shorter robber, busy stuffing cash into a bag, looted, keeled over with irritation. "Come on, man, just grab the kid and let's go." But David stepped forward again, now just a few feet from Lily. He placed himself between her and the gun, his broad frame shielding her small body completely. He crouched slightly, whispering to her so softly that only she could hear. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Stay behind me. Close your eyes." Lily's tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded, clinging to his leg as if it were the only solid thing in the world. The taller robber snarled. "I said don't move," he roared, and then, in a flash of rage, he pulled the trigger. The sound exploded through the store, deafening, shattering the fragile stillness. David felt the impact slam into his side, a searing pain tearing through his body. His breath caught in his throat as the force drove him backward, but he stayed upright, his arms instinctively reaching behind him to push Lily further out of harm's way. Ethan screamed. Catherine cried out. Lily's sobs rose in terror. For a moment the world spun in slow motion. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. David staggered, his vision blurring, but he refused to fall. He refused to give them the satisfaction. The shorter robber cursed loudly. "What the hell did you do? We didn't need to shoot anyone." The taller man's face twisted with panic. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the sound of someone calling for help. Their time was running out. "Forget it. Grab the bag, let's go," the shorter one barked. The two men bolted toward the door, fumbling with the lock before bursting into the night. The sound of their footsteps faded quickly into the dark street. Inside, chaos reigned. Catherine dropped to her knees beside David, her phone forgotten on the floor. Oh my God, she repeated, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the wound. "Stay with us, please. Stay with us." Lily clung to her mother now, sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan rushed out from behind the counter, his small body crashing into his father's side as tears streamed down his face. Dad, no! Please don't leave me!" David winced, fighting against the wave of pain threatening to drag him under. He looked at his son, then at the little girl, and finally at Catherine. His voice was weak, but it carried the weight of his heart. "They're safe," he whispered, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "That's all that matters." His knees buckled, and his body slumped to the floor. Catherine's hands shook as she tried to keep pressure on the wound. "Help! Somebody help us!" she cried toward the door, her voice breaking. Sirens grew louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flash against the window. Ethan's sobs echoed through the store, raw and heartbreaking. He shook his father's shoulder, begging him to stay awake. David's eyelids fluttered, his strength slipping. He fought to hold on, to not let the darkness consume him. Every fiber of his being screamed to keep breathing, for Ethan, for the life he still wanted to live. As the paramedics burst through the door, Catherine looked at David with tears streaking her cheeks. She didn't know this man, not really, but he had done something she would never forget. He had given everything for her daughter. And as they lifted him onto the stretcher, rushing him out into the flashing lights of the waiting ambulance, one truth settled deep into Catherine's heart. This man was more than a father, more than a stranger. He was a hero. The arrival of the CEO, Mother. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the wail of sirens split the night. Inside, David Carter lay on the stretcher, pale and trembling, blood soaking through the bandages hastily pressed against his side. His breaths came shallow, each one sounding like a battle, against the darkness that threatened to pull him under. The paramedics worked frantically, calling out numbers, checking his pulse, securing IV lines. Their voices were sharp, urgent, and filled with tension. "Stay with us, sir. Don't close your eyes," one of them commanded. "You've lost a lot of blood, but we're not letting you go tonight." David tried to respond, but his lips moved without sound. His mind drifted in and out of focus, catching only flashes of the world around him. The red light reflecting off the walls of the ambulance, the steady beeping of machines, the tears on his son's face. Ethan sat in the corner of the vehicle, clutching his small backpack, his wide eyes locked on his father. He had begged the paramedics to let him come, refusing to let go of his father's hand. Even now, Ethan's tiny fingers clung to David's, as though holding him could tether him to life. Catherine sat on the opposite bench, her arms wrapped tightly around Lily, who still sobbed into her mother's chest. For the first time in years, Catherine wasn't thinking about stock prices, meetings, or boardroom deals. All she could see was the image of a stranger stepping in front of her daughter, taking the bullet meant for her. That moment replayed in her mind like a cruel film strip, again and again, reminding her of how close she had come to losing everything. Her throat ached as she whispered into Lily's hair, "You're safe, baby. You're safe." But even as she said the words, she knew safety had come not from her, but from the man bleeding on the stretcher. When they reached the hospital, the emergency team rushed David into surgery. The sterile white walls blurred as nurses wheeled him down the corridor, their voices sharp and efficient. Ethan tried to follow, but a nurse gently held him back. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, you can't go in there," she said softly. Ethan's face crumpled. But he's my dad." His voice cracked, desperate. Catherine knelt down beside him, placing her hands on his trembling shoulders. She didn't know what to say. How could she comfort a child who might lose the only parent he had left? Still, she tried. "They're going to do everything they can to help him. Your dad is strong. He wouldn't give up so easily." The boy looked at her, his cheeks streaked with tears. "He promised me we'd get ice cream tonight," he whispered. "He never breaks promises." Catherine's heart twisted. She had broken more promises to her daughter than she could count, always choosing work over play, meetings over bedtime stories. Yet here was a man with nothing, a man struggling just to put food on the table, and he had still chosen to keep his promises, even if it meant taking a bullet for someone else's child. Hours passed like years in the waiting room. The chairs were uncomfortable, the clock ticked too loudly, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Catherine sat with Lily curled against her, the little girl finally drifting into an exhausted sleep. Across from her, Ethan sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, his face hidden. He hadn't spoken in a long time. Catherine studied him quietly. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, and yet his eyes, when they peeked out from behind his knees, held more strength than many adults she knew. He reminded her of his father, steady, selfless, carrying burdens heavier than his years. She leaned forward gently. "Ethan, can I sit with you?" The boy shrugged but didn't push her away. She moved closer, her voice soft. "Your dad is the bravest man I've ever seen. What he did tonight, it was more than courage. It was love." Ethan swallowed hard, his small voice barely above a whisper. "He always says people matter more than money. He says being kind is better than being rich. I didn't understand it before, but now I think I do." Catherine blinked, her chest tightening with shame. Money had always been her language, her armor, her goal. She had climbed higher than most people ever dreamed, yet in all her success she had lost the simple truths this child already knew. Love, kindness, presence. She wanted to say something, to promise Ethan she would help, but her throat closed. For the first time, Catherine Blake, the woman whose words commanded boardrooms and investors, found herself speechless in front of a child. At last, the doors at the end of the corridor swung open and a doctor approached, removing his surgical mask. His expression was grave but calm. "Are you his family?" he asked. Ethan jumped up. "I'm his son." His voice shook. "Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." The doctor crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. His tone softened. "Your dad is very strong. The bullet caused a lot of damage, and he lost a dangerous amount of blood. But he fought through surgery. He's alive, and for now, that's what matters." Relief crashed over Ethan like a wave, and he collapsed back into the chair, sobbing with both exhaustion and joy. Catherine felt her own tears spill freely for the first time that night. She held Lily tighter, whispering thanks under her breath. But the doctor's words weren't finished. "He isn't out of danger yet," he added carefully. "The next 24 hours will decide everything. His body is weak, and we don't know if he'll have the strength to recover fully. He'll need rest, and he'll need support." Ethan's small face crumpled again. Catherine reached out instinctively, pulling him into a hug. At first he resisted, stiff and unsure, but then his little hands clung to her blouse, his body shaking. She rocked him gently, as though he were her own. In that fragile moment, the lines between strangers blurred. It didn't matter that she was a CEO, a woman of power and wealth, and he was the son of a store clerk. What mattered was the bond of fear, of love, of humanity pulling them together in a waiting room while a hero fought for his life a few doors away. As the night deepened, Catherine sat with Ethan and Lily, both children eventually drifting to sleep against her. She stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of David. His face kept returning to her mind, his steady eyes, his calm voice, his final words before collapsing. They're safe. That's all that matters. And for the first time in years, Catherine asked herself a question she had long avoided. When had she last chosen people over business? When had she last said that love mattered more than money? The answer struck her with painful clarity. She hadn't. Not in a very long time. But David had, and because of him, her daughter still breathed. The battle between life and death. The steady rhythm of machines filled the hospital room, each beat marking a fragile thread of life. David Carter lay unconscious, his face pale against the stark white pillow, tubes and wires snaking across his body. His chest rose and fell with difficulty as though every breath was a mountain to climb. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passed in the streets, city lights glowed in the distance. But inside this room, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Ethan sat on a chair near the bed, his small hands gripping the edge tightly, his eyes fixed on his father's face. His heart hurt in a way he couldn't describe. He remembered the promise of ice cream, the way his dad had smiled at him just hours ago, and he couldn't understand how everything had changed so suddenly. To an 8-year-old, fathers were supposed to be invincible. They weren't supposed to bleed or collapse or leave. Catherine stood near the doorway, her arms folded across her chest. Lily leaned against her leg, her eyes red from crying, her rabbit clutched tightly in her hands. Catherine had always been in control, whether it was a billion-dollar deal, a merger, or a boardroom full of skeptical investors. She had faced them all with unshakable resolve. But here, staring at a man who had risked everything for her child, she felt powerless. No amount of money, no signed contract could guarantee the outcome she wanted most, for David Carter to open his eyes again. The doctors had explained it clearly. The bullet had torn through muscle and lodged dangerously close to vital organs. He had survived surgery, but the next hours would determine whether his body could keep fighting. He was on the edge, balanced between life and death, and all anyone could do was wait. Ethan reached out a trembling hand and brushed his father's arm. "Dad, it's me," he whispered. "Please don't leave. I need you. You promised." His voice cracked, breaking into sobs. "You promised we'd be together." Catherine felt her throat tighten. The boy's words pierced her deeper than anything she had ever heard in a board meeting or courtroom. She wanted to comfort him, but she knew nothing she said would replace the man lying motionless before them. Inside David's mind, a different world unfolded. He stood in a field of golden light, the air warm and gentle, the kind of place that felt untouched by pain. In the distance, he saw her, Sarah, his wife. She wore the same smile she had on their wedding day, her hair blowing softly in a breeze that didn't exist in reality. "David," she said, her voice like music, "you're tired." He wanted to run to her, to hold her again, to tell her everything he had carried alone since she left. But even as he took a step forward, he felt the weight of another pull, strong and unyielding. "Ethan," he whispered. The name anchored him. He saw flashes, his son at the kitchen table doing homework, his laughter when they kicked a soccer ball in the park, his sleepy face pressed against his chest at bedtime. Each memory lit a spark inside him, reminding him of the promise he had made when Sarah died. "I will raise him. I will protect him. I will not give up." Sarah's eyes softened. "He's strong because of you, but he still needs you, David. Don't stay here with me. Not yet." Pain surged through his chest as though the world was dragging him back. His body screamed in protest, but his heart clung to her words. Back in the hospital room, Ethan leaned forward, resting his forehead on his father's arm. "Dad, you always told me heroes never give up. Please, please don't give up now." Catherine finally knelt beside the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her voice trembled. "Your dad is the bravest man I've ever known. He fought for my daughter, for you, for all of us. If anyone can make it through this, it's him." Ethan looked up at her with tear-stained cheeks. "Do you really think so?" She nodded, her own eyes brimming with tears. "I know so." Hours dragged on. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting machines, whispering to each other. Each time they glanced at the monitors, Catherine's heart seized, fearing the worst. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the beeping grew steadier, the rhythm stronger. The doctor entered at dawn, his expression softer than the night before. "He's stabilizing," he said quietly. "It's still dangerous, but I think he's fighting his way back." Ethan's sob of relief filled the room. He squeezed his father's hand tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't leave me." Catherine closed her eyes, her body trembling as the weight of the night lifted. She looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in her lap, and whispered, "We're going to be different now. I promise you." For the first time in years, she meant it. Inside, David heard Ethan's voice breaking through the haze. He took a deep breath, painful but real. His eyelids fluttered, and though he couldn't yet speak, he knew he had chosen correctly. He had chosen life. A new beginning. The morning sun filtered through, Jeech the hospital blinds, painting soft golden lines across the room. David Carter stirred for the first time in days, his eyelids heavy, his body aching as though every muscle had been torn apart and pieced back together. He groaned faintly, and the sound broke the silence like a miracle. Ethan, who had been dozing in the chair beside him, bolted upright. His small hand flew to his father's arm. "Dad, Dad, can you hear me?" David's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. The blurry outlines of his son sharpened into focus, and despite the weakness in his body, his lips curved into a faint smile. "Hey, champ," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. Ethan's eyes filled with tears of relief. "You came back," he said, his voice trembling. "You didn't leave me." David lifted a shaking hand and brushed it against his son's cheek. "I told you I'd never break a promise," he murmured. Catherine stood in the doorway holding Lily's hand. She had been visiting every day, balancing her company with long hours at the hospital, but her mind was no longer divided. Tonight, tomorrow, and every day after, her daughter came first. The board meetings could wait. Profits could wait. For the first time, Catherine Blake had learned what truly mattered. She stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "you don't know me, but I owe you everything. You saved my daughter when I couldn't. I'll never forget what you did." David blinked at her, then turned his gaze toward Lily, who peeked out from behind her mother, clutching her stuffed rabbit. His smile widened faintly. "She's safe. That's all I wanted." Catherine's throat tightened. She had spent years building empires, buying companies, earning respect in boardrooms around the world, but none of it compared to the gratitude she felt in this simple moment. Her wealth had never bought her true peace, but here, standing in front of this man who had nearly died for her child, she realized she had been poor in the things that mattered most. The following weeks were a blur of recovery. David endured painful therapy sessions, his body slowly regaining strength. Ethan never left his side, always ready with encouragement, homework by his father's bed, and whispered stories to distract him from the pain. Catherine and Lily visited often, bringing meals, flowers, and quiet companionship. At first, David resisted the help. He was a man used to carrying burdens alone, but over time, he learned to accept it. One afternoon, as he sat in a wheelchair by the hospital window, Catherine joined him. She had traded her sharp suits for simpler clothes, her phone tucked away in her bag instead of glued to her hand. She looked at him thoughtfully. "I used to think success meant never stopping, never slowing down," she admitted. "But the night you saved Lily, you showed me what real success looks like. It's not about money, it's about people, it's about love, and I want to live differently now." David studied her, his dark eyes steady. "It's not easy to change the world," he said quietly, "but it's worth it. Kids notice more than we think. They don't need perfection. They just need us to show up." Catherine nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "Then that's what I'll do. For Lily, and maybe for myself too." Ethan and Lily became inseparable. They spent hours in the hospital playroom, building castles out of blocks, drawing pictures of superheroes, and telling each other stories. To Ethan, Lily wasn't just a friend, she was a reminder of why his dad was a hero. And to Lily, Ethan was the boy who had taught her laughter could still exist in scary places. Weeks later, the day finally came when David was discharged. He walked slowly with the support of a cane, Ethan by his side. As they stepped outside into the crisp air, Catherine and Lily were waiting. Catherine offered her hand to steady him, her smile warm. "You look good," she said. David chuckled softly. "I look like a man who survived something he shouldn't have." "Exactly," she replied, "and that makes you stronger than anyone I know." From then on, their lives intertwined. Catherine invited David and Ethan to dinner often, determined to show gratitude in every way she could. Ethan helped Lily with her homework, while Lily introduced Ethan to her world of fairy tales and ballet. Slowly, the four of them formed a bond that went beyond gratitude. It was friendship, and perhaps something more. One Saturday, months later, they gathered at the park. The sky was blue, the air filled with laughter and the distant bark of dogs. Ethan and Lily chased each other across the grass, their laughter ringing out like music. David sat on a bench, his cane resting beside him, his heart swelling with pride and peace. Catherine joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him and sat down, watching the children with a tender smile. "You know," she said softly, "before that night, I thought I had everything, money, power, status. But I was wrong. I was missing the most important thing, being present with the people I love." David glanced at her, his expression calm. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what really matters, and sometimes it takes almost losing it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, unspoken understanding passed between them. The children ran back, breathless and laughing, their cheeks flushed with joy. Lily slipped her hand into her mother's, while Ethan leaned against his father. The four of them stood together beneath the wide sky, no longer strangers, but something closer, something stronger. And as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold, a quiet truth settled into all their hearts. Heroes are not only found in stories or legends, they are fathers who refuse to give up, Mobwin. Theirs who choose to change, children who hold on to hope. Sometimes, saving one life saves many, and sometimes, in the act of saving others, we find ourselves saved too.